We find our tragic tanker today in the TNH 105-1000, and he's playing on Hidden Village. This is the Tier 8 Czechoslovakian heavy tank. It's got a 2-shot auto reloader unless you decide to go with the 1-shot. But our tragic tanker today has the 2-shot, and he finds himself in a Tier 10 lobby with his Tier 8, which is nothing surprising. So he's decided to go toward the Eastern Front in his Czechoslovakian Tier 8 heavy tank, and he quickly finds himself all alone. Despite being all alone, he decides to stand his ground over on the Eastern Front and sets up on the corner, where he waits patiently. This Pershing will be his first victim, his first spoil of war. But wait, look in the corner. An allied heavy tank runs to his aid in his time of desperate need. Lo and behold, the unwitting Pershing tank falls for the patience and takes one and only one shell to his tracks and his hull before getting away. Now, our tragic tanker must wait patiently yet again. However, this ally in the form of an object has other plans, and together they push through and they push past the temple. However, the Pershing has set up a trap, and the allies decide not to fall for it, and the Pershing's patience proves to be that of a mosquito, and it dies. With the team starting to collapse, because they all decide to go to the same place and fight on the same exact front, and yet all decide to die even though they outnumbered the enemy team, Kongai has decided that he needs to push up. He needs to push forward with his heavy tank ally and start putting in kills. His next victim he finds is the object 257, who doesn't stand a chance, and he decides to keep him spotted here. Keep him spotted for his tank, who seems to be shooting HE. It was an Iron Rain who had HE loaded, and clips him out 1 shot at a time. Took him 3 shots. His entire magazine, though, had he had AP loaded, it would only take 1 penetration. Regardless, the 257 is dead, and his team can rest easy now that it is 7 versus 12. With no hope in sight, our ally makes a beeline for artillery, and he does in fact find him. There are still 7 allies left. Certainly he'll be able to kill this artillery unit, and then get back to helping the team before they're all dead, correct? No, 3 just died all at the same time. And Kongai bounces his shot. Not to worry. He pens that one, and his ally, the object, finishes him off. He is proven to be quite a valuable asset to this push. But the rest of the team, they have all proven to be useless. After waiting patiently for the inevitable death to reach his body, death itself finds its way. But our hero, our tanker, he puts 1-2 shells into the enemy object before getting finished off by a wild Ferdinand hiding amongst the bamboo. His team existed none, and the game ended 4th. After the frustration of 1 Tier 10 game, our hero decides to jump into another Tier 10 game. He's obviously a harbinger of pain and misery, specifically to himself. He drives again to the Eastern Front, this time with a T95E6 as an ally and a Bellerophon as an ally. However, this ally seems to think that twerking is still relevant, and is proving to be more useless than a bottle of sand filled with anti-itch cream. And he takes a shot right into the twerking booty. There does not seem to be enough room for one so big there. And he's dead anyway, shot right in the same cheek as before. So our tanker decides to try the other side, where he finds a bat chat. He puts 1 into the bat chat, follows it up with another, which merely tracks him. Actually, it merely damages his track. And here comes another autoloader, a TVP, who puts 1 shot in, while the other 2 bounce and 1 hits a rock. He now finds himself surrounded and alone. as his T95E6 decides to poke the same corner and suffer the same fate. But here comes a T58 Heavy. Our tanker puts 1, 2 into him and sets him on fire. Surely he's going to have a... No, he's dead. He was killed by the fire tank. The fire tank that still burned. With frustration beginning to mount heavily, he decides to join yet another Tier 10 game, this time Erlenberg. He again decides to head toward the Eastern Front, where he will encounter an Inferno. An Inferno by himself, standing tracked, and artillery already aiming at the clone guy, and missing him for nearly 200 damage. Realizing it was just an Inferno, our tanker has already decided to head back to defend the base, where an ally, Panzerkampfwagen 7, is requesting help. Do not worry, your tanker has heard the call for aid. And he responds, he answers, and he drives. In this lower position, he's able to find angles and shots on these enemies who would have been too far away should he have been camping. However, only one shell flies true and hits the E5 in the lower plate. The other shell flies into the Peregrine. This house will have to do for the remainder of the game, as survival seems ill. Spotting seems the only option. Fighting? Impossible. Allies are going to have to come through, as assist damage seems to be the only thing left. Perhaps a little bit of experience at the end of the game. Perhaps a little bit of extra effort before losing will come through. He finds a fire on the Conqueror, but the Conqueror deftly puts it out, and 2 more of his allies go down without much of a fight, and he finds himself now at the forefront, with 3 tanks bearing down. T92 finishes off the Conqueror, and he now finds just 3 who were previously spotted, but the numbers multiply as the wild tanks get frisky with one another. More begin spawning. More begin closing in on our lone TNH. Our TNH tries something clever. He turns his turret to the side where he will be able to spot more, and backs out. Backs out to see if he can spot this chisel. And though it wasn't him, it was the thought that counts. He puts 1 in, and the second one bounces. But not before the chisel returns a shot and puts an even meatier roll into our TNH, who is now dwindling down to 950 health, 950 hit points, 950 life force remaining within him, within his vehicle, before the inevitable death arrives. A heat shell whacks him in the side, a heat from someone unknown, another animal, another tank, another frisky wannabe winner. Our tanker wants to be a winner. Our tanker wants to survive. But the game has other plans. That's it. It's time to leave. It's time to get out of this place and find someone to shoot, after all. How about this Stone Cold? Maybe he will sacrifice his health. Good. Come to me. First one bounces, inevitably so. The second one does penetrate, but now he finds himself with 12 hit points and another T58 Heavy closing in on him. Oh boy, is it going to be 2 times in a row? No, instead he backs out, purposely giving himself to the Sabaton tank, the Primo Victoria, the one who's actually played the game aggressively, unlike the camping T58, who had been sitting in the back with his free Tier 10 tank. It was another tragic defeat. His team doing next to nothing, while our tanker does more than even his Tier 10s. It was quite sad. Another game is in store. And wouldn't you know, it is but another Tier 10 game. Another Tier 10 game, but this time he decides to drive north, straight toward the enemy. After his long climb to the top, he finds himself at the top and drives down, where Stritzvong STRVK is in his spot where he wants. Why are you there, sir? Why can't you just allow things to happen? Allow the tanker, the TNH, the desperate one wanting a win, to have your position. But you had to be so rude. You had to be so diabolical. What is one to do in this situation? He could rush him, but then get beaten down by DPM. However, he has an E75 friend. E75. Why don't you follow your TNH? Follow him to victory. If you both push, he stands no chance. And it's true. Oh. Of course, Mama Bear was present. Things were frustrating so much in fact, that our tanker had decided to resort to Tier 1. Not just Tier 1, he was going to use Tier 1 and make sure his commander was trained in the most useful skill of all time, Comms Technician. Yes, come here, Mr. Comms Technician man. You and the T1, you will be the saving's grace. After waiting in queue for nearly 2 minutes, he finally finds himself on mines, with but one real player on the enemy team, Sergeant T, U.S. Army. The tanker initially decided he wanted to throw himself off a cliff and allow Sergeant T, U.S. Army, the one real player, being a new player he was, to have a good game. However, the tanker decided to look up his stats, and his blood began to boil. He appeared to be a super unicum with 231 games in the last 30 days. However, not a single game was played above Tier 5. In fact, he seemed content playing his L-Tractor with 725 games, his T26X with 397, and his T22 prototype, his choice for today, 301 times. No, yielding was not an option. Total victory was needed. After quickly dispatching the Medium 1, and then turning his attention to the NC-31, he realized a different revenue was needed. Down the cliff he must go if he is to win this game. No shots he could find on the Fiat, so perhaps he ought to reload. Perhaps he ought to find a safe way down. Perhaps the comms commander can find a way down this way. No, the comms commander could not drive. He could only relay information, and that information led to his death. Weazen wheezed as he laughed. The tanker was dead, and all hopes rested on Shooty Tooty. Shooty Tooty aimed up a shot, but there was a building in the way, for it was not smart enough to shoot through the building. However, driving sideways and shooting, that makes more sense. I fired off a burst, penned a few shells, and continued on. Fired off another burst, and another, and another. But Sergeant T, U.S. Army, found his prey. The game was over. There was no hope. And Shooty McTooty died. With a refusal to give up, a refusal to back down, our tanker decided to try one more game, yet again at Tier 10 and his TNH. But there is one thing he noticed, one person that seemed to be in every game he played, and that person was the common factor, the common reason for defeats. It was himself. He himself alone could he blame. So he had one job, one mission, one thing he knew he needed to do. So he rose his gun straight into the air, erect as the tallest statues, and drove straight. Drove without thinking, drove without nary regard. Drove straight across these white picketed fences, across the town, across that car and that truck and that other truck and another truck, a lot of trucks, because he's in America right now, knocking down more picketed fences and more buildings and houses, He nearly knocks down a tree, but he finds himself at the beach, where he runs over and through a boat to do no damage and drives into the water, where he blocks 1210 damage and dies. Why have the tanker on your team if it means losing? He thought to himself. So he ended it all. After waiting many long minutes in his submersible, the enemy team finally began to succumb to the sheer numbers of 14 versus 15. His team was like a blazing inferno, one set ablaze in California. Unstoppable, lighting everything on fire, everything in its wake, destroyed as the enemy team burned red in their own flames. That is correct, Commander. From the underwater. You could not have said it any better yourself. For victory was had. And the tanker knew it was because of him. Though he was not the MVP, he knew that was because the game did not recognize his sacrifice, did not recognize the fact that he gave himself away to RNG, gave himself away to victory, where at last he could lie in peace. You will be remembered, TNH 105. You will be remembered. Alright, let's be serious here for a moment. Or for the end of this. I hope you guys enjoyed that absolute ridiculousness. What on earth was with that session? That had to be the worst session I've ever had. I want to go out, and I'm going to be honest with you guys. There's been a lot of times where we've complained about terrible sessions. We've complained about terrible updates. But I have to say, whatever they did to the matchmaking, that last update at the start of August, is probably the worst thing I've ever experienced other than the change, other than 6.0. That coupled with 6.0, I've never seen anything like it. I've never had such incompetence on my team time and time and time again. And to see so many tier 10s, this is tier 10 game, tier 10 game, tier 10 game. I don't care what Mr. SPG says. Obviously, that's false. I mean, look what you just saw here. It's tier 10, tier 10, tier 10, jumped to tier 1, came back, tier 10. It does not cease. Some of these games were out of order for the editing purposes, for comical. For instance, the game on El Alamein was actually directly after the last game where we drowned ourselves. But hey, it was still tier 10, so we didn't deceive you there. But it's ridiculous. What are your thoughts in the comments below on this matchmaking? Like, what's going on? Why is this a thing? It makes no sense to me. But I hope you guys all enjoyed. If you did, slap that like button, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys all later. Take care, everyone, and peace out.